When the mailman left a box on our doorstep one rainless afternoon, my mother told me not to open it. She said it belonged to the person who loved her most, and that some things were only to be seen when the heart was ready. I didn't listen. And in the small, careful way that all mistakes teach us, that box taught me how to forgive. When the box arrived, it was the kind of thing that looked unremarkable until you recognized all the ways it could hold an ending. It sat beneath the porch light, the cardboard darkened from some rain earlier in the day and tied with string that had been knotted and knotted until it felt like a promise. There was a label with a name I knew in the way people know their breath. Eleanor Hale. My mother. Eleanor never had much patience for surprise. She liked things where every seam lived exactly where it belonged. The way she folded shirts, the way she arranged silver spoons that never stirred the tea. Yet when the mailman left the box and I came home from the market with a bag of oranges, she stood at the door and put both hands over the top like she might hold back whatever lived inside. "Don't open it," she said, with a softness that was not always in her voice. That softness makes a grammar all its own, a grammar that says there is history in the hush. I put the oranges on the counter and went to kiss her cheek. Her skin smelled faintly of lavender and salt, the smell of summers when the ocean seemed closer and people were not so busy being complicated. She looked at me like someone who'd been given the exact question she had been saving for. "Who sent it?" I asked. She closed her eyes. "A courier from the old estate. It's addressed to me, but they said it arrived addressed also to the house." "It is from him." I understood, then, the way the string seemed thinner. The hymn was always present in our house like a low instrument, not played, but felt. His name, Thomas, had been on breakfast plates, on the tag of a coat she never wore, on the spine of a book that lived on the nightstand. Thomas had left before I was born, in a manner that was very normal for small, private griefs, quietly and really permanently. There was a story we knew in fragments, a lamp left on a windowsill, a promise to return, a letter that never reached a hand because roads sometimes forget where people live. Eleanor had married him young. She had a softness for things that were fragile. After he was gone, she learned to measure time in cups of tea and in the thin pages of diaries where small domesticities were described with devotion. She kept his things in a cedar chest under the bed, a watch with a hairline crack, a pen with the nib bent, photographs with the corners rubbed by fingers. Those things were like small bones of an animal. Not living, not dead, but arranged into a shape that a heart could visit. She tugged the string and made me promise again. Her eyes had a locked quality, like a room whose door had been shut to keep something safe. I promised and I meant it. Or at least I meant to until curiosity, that old warm animal, made a small nest in my ribs. 2 nights later we opened the box together because my mother, for reasons she did not explain, sat across from me and gently pushed it toward the kitchen table. The knot came undone as if someone had been waiting for that exact movement. Inside, among acid-brown tissue and a faint smell of cedar and oil, there was a collection of objects that looked like a map for the kind of love that quietly rearranged a life. First there was a folded stack of letters, tied with blue ribbon. The sort of ribbon you don't find at a grocer, the kind people keep after the last holiday. There was a pocket watch in a leather case, and beside it, a tiny hand-stitched map of a garden I recognized only from stories my mother sometimes told when she thought I slept. A place called the Willow Lot, 3 streets over, back when her world had been fresher and smaller and everyone's foibles were bright with possibility. At the bottom of the box, wrapped like a secret, was a small wooden box no larger than a child's palm. Its lid had a star carved into it and a faint scratch that ran across the top like a small river. My fingers remembered the way small boxes feel when you open them. They reveal not treasure but architecture, what a person had decided to keep and why. Inside that tinny wooden box was a soft scrap of fabric folded into itself. It was not valuable by any worldly measure, only the thin inside layer of an old shirt, the place near the collar where a woman had once put her cheek. On that fabric someone had embroidered a single sentence, in impossibly tiny stitches. "Forgive me when I forget the ordinariness of your love." We read that sentence aloud. My mother's mouth folded around each word and then seemed to gather new meaning from them. A silence that held 100 small things pressed into it moved through the room like a gentle wind. "Do you remember the Willow Lot?" Eleanor said, voice thin as tissue. She smelled of tea and, for a fragment, of the kind of light in a child's memory. We used to go there and count the lanterns in the hedgerows. We said we would live inside a counting of lights. Her voice had the quality of a person who is both summoning and yielding. The letters were in Thomas's hand, ink-flowing script, the loops where he pressed his pen into the paper like a means of grounding himself. They were not all love letters, not the swooning sort one sees in plays. They were precise, recommendations for repairing a roof beam, a joke about a cat, a remark about a hat. Underneath those practicalities, the letters carried a tenderness that looked like the everyday. We spent the evening reading them in order. Each letter was a small room. In the first, he wrote about a lemon tree he discovered on a borrowed balcony and how it made him imagine her with a salad bowl that always smelled of citrus. In the second, he drew, as a joke, the map to a secret ice cream shop that sold flavors with names like Midnight Confessions. By the fourth letter his handwriting softened, and sometimes it wandered into the kind of language that edged close to confession. He relied on her in ways he had not expected. He feared being forgetful because it would be a betrayal of the small trust she assumed. The letters made me understand something, that love sometimes does not sign itself in high declarations but in the drift of attentive smallness. He wrote like someone who learned to be present in increments. He learned to notice the way rain patterned a roof and how to fix the squeak in a stair. He measured devotion in actions and micro-gestures. Between some of the letters there were short notes, in another script entirely. Larger, younger, as if someone had taken the pen and scribbled across the space in the margin. They were from a child. Presciently, I recognized my own childish flourishes, my way of hitting the page with a heart-shaped stamp of ink. The letters held a symmetry. Father, mother, child. The life they described was ordinary and generous in a way that made nostalgia smell like salt and boiled potatoes. When we had finished the first bundle, my mother reached into the box again and pulled out a thin envelope with no address, just a single word, when. Her hands trembled the way they had when she made certain decisions. Measured, careful. She slid the envelope open and a slip of paper, smooth with age, fell into her palm. On it was written a single instruction, in Thomas's precise hand. Open me only if you are certain the time is soft enough to receive me. My mother laughed. A small thing that turned into something like weeping. He always thought he could calendar tenderness, she said. Who asks for a soft time? Who schedules a heart's readiness? We looked at each other and then at the ceiling and laughed in the way that siblings or long-married people do when they are aware of their own small absurdities. But under the laugh was another feeling, an ache made of curiosity and reluctance. For a strangely long minute neither of us reached for the envelope. It seemed as if reaching for it would be like reaching into the sea. The motion would call currents we could not predict. At twilight, when the house's lamps were thin as fingernails, my mother said plainly, "Read it aloud." I took the paper and unfolded it like a moth, careful not to tear whatever fragile organism lived inside. The note began with something that might have been ordinary and became extraordinary for being so. Eleanor, it read. If you are reading this, then perhaps I have been late in ways that matter. Or I have been early in ways that do not. There are things I taught you without saying, and there are things I never learned to say at all. If you can, hold a cup for me tonight. Let it be heavy with something warm. If you can let the kettle sing, know I loved that little white whistle like an announcement. You know the Willow Lot. You know the exact place where a boy once hid a coin. Find that coin if you can. When you find it, it will feel small and exact, like regret. Keep it in your pocket and do not show anyone. Put it next to your key to keep you honest. I cannot promise to stay. But I promise that I tried, to be accurate and good and clumsy. Love. T. We read the slip twice, and then thrice, as if the act of repetition might unspool a knot. The instruction was less of a directive than a conversation across time. It asked for small acts, a cup, a kettle, a search for a coin. Those small acts rearranged grief into motion. The next day I walked to the Willow Lot under a thin sky. The lot had become smaller over time. The hedgerows were clipped like the backs of small animals. The lanterns were rusting into their old bones. I found the place Thomas had described, the stone by the third oak, and knelt with the seriousness a child takes before a game. The coin I found was indeed small and exact, the surface rubbed away by fingers who had held it for luck. I wrapped it in a scrap of clean tissue and slipped it into my pocket. It felt warm as if it had been waiting. When I returned home, the house felt larger because I had moved through a place that belonged to us both and had brought a tiny piece back out of it. My mother filled the kettle and let it sing for a good long minute, the steam like a way of releasing everything that had been sealed up. We sat with the cup and the coin between us and spoke in small things. Weather, bread, the sound the pipes made on cold mornings. The letters continued to change the shape of our days. Each small instruction in them was like a pebble dropped in a bowl. The rings made new patterns. Some were sweetly domestic, repair the back step. Some were oddly prescient. If you find the blue tin, don't throw away the lid. And others were blunt with regret, quietly asked forgiveness for being absent in ways that were not simply physical. There was one letter near the bottom of the bundle that read like a conversation with the future. He wrote about a sickness he feared, described it with the inattentive specificity of someone who has read the wrong chapter of a book. If my teeth begin to want the wrong color, remind me of lavender. It was as if his awareness of failing was a creature he tried to name so it might be tamed. He wanted to be human and remembered even then to be amusing. He advised her on how to carve a pumpkin with dignity and what sort of music was acceptable to play in the kitchen while mending socks. After a while, the letters became a map for us to live by. We started to do the things he suggested. We fixed the back step and felt less like time's victims. We kept a tin in the pantry with lids that seemed to please some unseen deity. We kept lavender in a jar for the nights when voices became thinner and more distant. The ritual of the letters took the sharpness out of loss. It braided the small ordinary into an arc that taught us how to go forward. But there was one letter we could not decode. It arrived folded 3 times and sealed with a spot of wax, dark and cracked like an old moon. On the outside someone, not Thomas, had scrawled a single word, after. My mother said she had found it at the back of the cedar chest months after the rest arrived, as if it had been waiting for permission. We set it aside. It sat on the mantel until one rain-pale evening when the 3 of us, my mother, myself, and my nephew who slept with the gate half open like a person who leaves a light on for strangers, sat with mugs and blankets. The house had a hush that night as if it wanted a story. My mother's hands shook when she broke the wax. She read slowly, choking on some of the softer syllables. If you are reading this after I am gone, it began, then plant a pear tree in the place where you most think of the sound of laughter. Don't ask me for riches. I have none. Give the watch to someone who knows how to read the sky. If your heart wants to ask me the sort of thing that is not fit for paper, go to the pier and talk into the wind. It will answer you in the way only the sea can, by taking what is heavy and giving back what is small and usable. At the bottom of that letter was a postscript, a line stitched with pen into the margin. Forgiveness is a workbench. Bring your hands. That last line changed the shape of us. It pushed us from ritual into labor. We began to do explicit acts of forgiveness, not the miraculous sort you read about in books, but the practical sort. Calling someone and saying what was owed, returning a sweater, telling a neighbor that the slamming of their gate had kept us awake. It was as if the letters had given us permission to tidy the rooms of regret. Then, on a Tuesday bright as a sliced apple, 2 men in a faded suit came from the estate lawyer. They brought papers that smelled of dust and seriousness. They had come to say that the estate had been in his name alone, and that debts and bequests would have to be settled. They placed in our hands a ledger and a single sealed photograph. My mother opened the photograph with the fearless patience of someone who had learned to hold images without letting them hurt too much. It was a picture of Thomas as a young man at a market stall, smiling with teeth that showed both mischief and worry. The men explained, in legal terms, that he had left many small debts and one small gift, a house in a town 3 hours away with a garden that matched the map he'd drawn. The house was in disrepair, but the garden had perhaps some claim to being as he remembered it. There was also a mention of a name we did not know, Lydia Grange. A woman who had worked for the estate and who had been more loyal than a clock. My mother listened and then blinked, as if the news were a puzzle she could not place. "He left a house?" she asked, like a child picking up a piece for the first time. It seemed astonishing that he had kept anything beyond the domestic scrap we had found. It seemed like a final, impractical generosity. We went. The house had a sag of its own, like someone who had kept a secret for a long time and had grown tired. The garden was overrun, romantic and wild, as if it had decided to reclaim the life of its plants. In a chest under flour-dusted sheets, we found a ledger with names and small amounts meticulous enough to have been written by someone who counted affection in currency. And there, in the back of the pages, was a note from Lydia Grange. She wrote in an even, practical hand. "He asked me to keep a record of kindnesses he couldn't always remember to do. If your mother should want to send the watch to a stranger who reads the sky, tell them Lydia says the watch keeps good time when it has fresh oil." My mother read that and laughed the sorts of laughs that undo people. "He trusted her with his memory," she said. "Who does that but someone who believed memory could be stewarded?" We realized Thomas had been poor in many ways and generous in the particular. He had saved little things for other people the way someone might hide seeds. He left instructions because he was afraid the world would swallow the ordinary. And he left a ledger because he thought kindness should have a balance sheet. The weeks that followed were full of movement. We traveled to the house. We planted a pear tree on the lawn in a place that caught the laugh of the wind. We gave the watch to a sailor who said he read the sky in the old ways. We kept small rituals and added new ones. A box of lids, a shelf of good scissors, a jar of lavender in the medicine cabinet. The house shaped itself around these things with a gratitude that felt almost visible. And then one day, months later, my mother became ill in the way that is both gentle and a thief. She began forgetting faces and names. At first we thought it was the faint fog of a bad night. We joked about not being able to find our keys. Then we began to misplace entire afternoons, like pages torn from a book. We called doctors and made appointments and cleared the clutter of our own panic. The illness moved in small increments. There were dinners she could not recall arranging, songs she would ask for and then not remember having sung. There were moments she would look at me as if I were both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, and the way she searched my face made my chest ache in a manner too big to speak. Sometimes, in that long, slow season, she would find her way back with a laugh and recite a sentence from Thomas's letters as if the words had been carved into her in ink. The fabric in the wooden box would surface in her hands and she would smooth it and murmur the embroidered plea. Once she asked me, with sudden concreteness, "Did I ever tell you about the time we hid a coin?" "Yes," I would say, offering the small answer that seemed like a tether. She would nod and then let her eyes fall closed, and rest there for a minute as if the act of remembering had been the work of a muscle that needed time to cool. The day she could no longer make tea by herself came without drama. It arrived like a weather change and took space. We called Lydia Grange and the sailor. We watered the pear tree and tied ribbons to its branches in colors Thomas would have laughed at. We gathered the letters and read them long into the night. We folded that little map for the child who would still one day ask where the willow grew. We made sure everything had a name, and then a place. When my mother left, it was quiet, the kind of exit that seems designed to prevent show. The house felt like a skin that had been peeled back, revealing the domestic bones. The community came and they did what communities do. They brought bread, they fixed a leaky pipe, they sat and told jokes that would have made her laugh. We buried her with a small stack of letters folded into her coat pocket. The tiny wooden box went with her, stitched to the lining like a heartbeat. After the funeral we found another envelope slid beneath the clock with a single word on it. Fix. We had assumed there would not be more. We had assumed that with the hush would come an end. But Thomas had written as if he imagined future hands would be needed to finish whatever work forgiveness required. We followed what he had left with patience and a desire to honor the smallness of it. We wrote to the people that had been in the ledger. We sent notes of thanks to the sailor and a tin of tea to Lydia Grange. We did odd kindnesses for neighbors. We learned to be precise in our kindness the way he had been in his counting. Whether we were paying debts or giving small joys, it felt as if the letters were a script for a life that could be lived without apology. Years later, sitting in the garden where the pear tree had grown wide enough to shade a bench, I put my hand in my pocket and found the coin. It had kept warm in that way only objects in pockets can, rubbed, carrying the shape of a person's thumb. I turned it over, and for a beat of something like prayer I forgave myself for the minor trespasses and the major ones. I forgave and registered the small, astonishing fact that forgiveness is not a single ceremony but a long string of small acts. Fixing a step, writing a note, learning a neighbor's name and using it. In the end, I realized the letters were less about Thomas's memory than about our capacity to be small and generous. He taught us to build a world made of habits, to oil a hinge when it squeaked instead of allowing resentment to accumulate into the shape of silent bedrooms, to count the lanterns and to call people by their true names. I kept that coin and I kept the wooden box, and I still, sometimes when the evening is all soft and the air smells of pear, take out the scrap of fabric and run my thumb along the embroidered words. They are frayed now but legible. The sentence reads the same as the first time I saw it. Forgive me when I forget the ordinariness of your love. It is a request, a confession, and a contract with a smaller life. I answer it by tucking a note into a jar and leaving it on a porch for someone who needs permission to take care of themselves. The jar sits beneath the lamp in the kitchen and glows, in the way old things glow when they have been loved. Tonight, if you have someone whose laugh has become fickle with time or whose face is a map you no longer read easily, make tea and sit with them. There is no test to see if the time is soft. Tenderness does not send an invitation. Just place a small thing in their palm, a coin, a ribbon, a scrap of fabric. Tell a story you know by heart and then fold it carefully up like a seam. Let the small, ordinary acts be your way of speaking. Forgiveness is a workbench. Bring your hands, and keep them busy. That is the way we make the world hospitable to love. Good night.